Hello, welcome to Teeth and Gil rant about a game that we like. Well, not really rant so much. So, my name is Teeth Whitener, and we are here to talk about a little bit about the Persona series. Specifically, we're going to be focusing pretty heavily on Persona 5 because I have not beaten Persona 4 and I have not touched Persona 3. So I wouldn't be able to give any real thoughts on that outside of basic overview information. We'll talk about it a little bit because Gil has played a good chunk of 4 and he's read a manga on 3, so he understands the plot a bit better than I do. But we'll let that be covered in the discussion itself. So for now, we're going to do our welcomes. Welcome to Costco, Scrubs, Autumn, Ruth, Goji, Psyche herself, Lil Hummy, and I think that's it. So, without further ado, we will call our friend Gilgamesh King 07.
I'm just here to help with the audio.
You don't need to.
Okay, did you turn it down?
Hello.
Okay, I love you. Have
Hello. How are you?
How are you?
I'm well. So we ready to get this show on the road?
Absolutely. This is the long-awaited Persona episode, of course.
Yes, long awaited. Like from all the way from earlier today, people have been clamoring for it. So
Millennia.
So, where do we want to start? I got an outline. So, do we want to follow that rigidly, or do you want to give like some introductory words about the series?
I think we can mostly follow the outline. I'll just say that I think both of us are fairly big fans of the series.
Yeah.
But outside of that,
I really liked the first game, Persona 5. I haven't really played a whole lot of the other two, so but I like what they did with it. Thank you for the raid, Agni Kai. Speaking of Agni Kai, we are next week. I think we're going to be discussing Avatar: The Last Airbender. Specifically comparing the first season to the TV show, to the movie, see how that goes. Probably be a disaster. But for now, we're talking about Persona. So yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of the series. It was my second favorite. Persona 5 was my second favorite game from 2017, in a year that had 3 of my favorite games ever come out at the same time. So it's pretty big praise. I really enjoy the game. I go back to it an awful lot. It's hard to explain because it's like a social sim, but also very much an RPG. So it's kind of an interesting blend of those two things. Other games have since kind of followed that lead a little bit, like Fire Emblem with Fire Emblem Three Houses kind of implemented some Persona-y elements to it. And there have probably been other games that have done the same in the past. So, with that in mind, basically, so for those of you who don't know anything about Persona, I'm gonna guess most of you probably do, but the basic idea of it is a bunch of teenagers struggle against some sort of societal evil and try to fix the world one way or another. Beginning in Persona 3, they kind of implemented some stuff that has become a staple. There's an overarching theme and a color scheme to each game since that, and they've kind of stuck to that since then. But with a brief overview of the history of it, let me scroll up a little bit. Persona was actually a spin-off. It's a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series. after a game called that I've never played or really heard much about, Shin Megami Tensei If, which had a high school setting, they decided to follow up by doing another series with a high school setting, and that was Persona 1. I don't know what it was called, like the Second Coming or something. I don't know. All Persona games, other than Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, follow high school students. And in Persona 3, they implemented something called social links that's become a really big staple for the series, wherein you build kind of a relationship between people in the game, whether you're party members or NPCs. So that's kind of a history of the game series. It started like in the mid to late 90s, and they released games very infrequently. I think Persona 3 came out in 2006 or 7. Persona 4 came out in 2011, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And Persona 5 came out in 2017. So it's like every 6 years. Not very common at all. So.
And then they always seem to have a in-between game too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a bunch of spin-offs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, anything you'd like to add to that?
Just that there's usually kind of a revamp game. At least with 4 and 5, you had like Persona 4 Golden Hour, now Persona 5 Royal, where they take the base games and they add a lot of content to it, but keep the main story beats for the most part. But yeah, all of them have their own kind of unique twists and have been interesting to see over the years, the last decade.
Yeah, last decade or so, they've made a lot of pretty big changes to the series. But the series changes so infrequently. I should say makes major releases so infrequently that any game that comes out and it's going to be a pretty big deal. So there's a lot of common things that run between Persona games, threads, so to speak. Every series has common elements, and hopefully every game changes some of those. But Persona doesn't. Persona changes a fair number simply because the games come so sparsely. But here's a few, or I should say, but whenever you play a Persona game, you can expect to see a lot of this stuff. It's going to be all high school students, turn-based combat. They're going to use psychological entities known as personas. They're going to use, they're going to form social links or bonds between each character, at least after Persona 3. There's a concept of a double life, wherein one part of you is doing this thing and the other part of you is doing another thing. All of them have done dungeon crawling. All of them are set in Japan, and all of them pretty much have some element of Jungian psychology that they implement. So, any of those that you'd like to kind of elaborate on? Because I kind of went just boom, 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 boom. There's also probably other things that I missed, but those are some of the big things.
Wait, it broke up there a second. You kind of want to what?
Are there any of those individual points that you want to elaborate on or go in depth on? Because I kind of just hit each of them pretty quickly. I didn't talk about any of them. So.
I think for me, something that makes Shin Megami games gives them their like style, and then in general, and then Persona games more specifically, like is the psychological element of it, of the persona being like your true self or your hidden self within your soul kind of thing. Like it is this personality of yours that is underneath everything else you layer on top in your day-to-day, if you will. So I always thought that was an interesting concept, and the ones that they end up coming up with, like the unique special ones for the characters, were always really interesting, I thought.
Right. Something interesting about that is that the way that each game introduces how a person gets their persona is different. in Persona 4, for instance, they have to confront a harsh truth about themselves, something they don't want to admit. And that is, or should say, and them admitting it and embracing it, even if you don't necessarily like it, is they usually end it by saying, "This is my persona. It's the truth of what I feel about the world." And truth is a really big part of the Persona 4, thematic element. Like, people were trying to uncover the truth of some sort of weird thing that's going on. Persona 5, the persona is rejecting or I should say, kind of rejection of society's idea of what you should be or who you should be, or rejecting your place. Something like that when the protagonist gets his persona, he has been dealt a pretty harsh hand, and he basically, something inside of him saying, are you just going to sit there and take it, or are you going to fight back? And then he says, I'm going to fight back. So he gets to use that part of him, his persona. So that's kind of what personas are. It's you, it's not you, and it's also something else. So it's like you, it's kind of something sometimes a truth you don't want to admit. Sometimes it's a part of you that you're not too proud of. And sometimes it's something that you're embarrassed about or ashamed of. Or something you don't want to admit, like people aren't naturally programmed to want to rebel against societal structures, but that's what Persona 5 is really kind of about. That's kind of a common thematic element. What the persona is changes each game. I haven't played 3, but I imagine it's probably the same thing.
3's is interesting, actually. It's and it's been a minute, but theirs is more about confronting fear, and kind of like embracing that in a way, because to activate their personas in 3, you need to use an evoker, which is a gun, and you shoot yourself in the head with it.
I've seen that.
Yeah, it's like 3 is very aggressive, actually, and more like violent almost in how they do it. Oh, something small also to point out, there has been an animal creature in 3, 4, and 5 that can have personas. So it's something else that just, I guess, the game devs just thought was something that did well with people, and that would is successful, so they just kept it in, even if Teddy is the worst character in the entire series. And I mean, oh man,
yeah, something like a mascot. I hesitate to say to draw on younger viewers, because it's not, or younger players, because they're all rated M and they don't like pull punches when it comes to M-rated stuff. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just something that some Japanese developers feel they need to put in the game. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I really couldn't tell you, because it is a bit bizarre. I think Morgana's a better character than Teddy from what I've seen, but I haven't played through 4. So. Yeah. Something common in terms of the combat, they all are all combat is turn-based. They switch stuff in, switch stuff out frequently, but something that's common throughout most of the games is something called all-out attack, wherein, like, if you do a certain number of things, you get to all people in your party.
Daddy, hunk rat.
Hey, thank you for resubscribing, Swampy. 19 months. That's like a long time. So, thanks for resubscribing. But like with all-out attack, everybody attacks all at once. Everybody who's active in the party, that is. And then they have personas can use like psychological attacks, which are usually more element based, like fire, ice, stuff like that.
Right.
Social links is a really it's kind of what made the game into more of a social simulator than other games in the series had been, and other really more RPGs. I can't think of a whole lot of RPGs that have a social aspect to them, at least not before Persona came out. Persona 3 came out. Basically, you meet somebody, you have some sort of bond with them, and your relationship with them develops as the game progresses. They're all dungeon crawlers, all of them, and they implement that in much the same way in each game, except for Persona 5, which has different dungeons in each called Palace. They're all set in Japan. Almost all of them are centered around high school students. I don't really have anything else to say about that. The double life is kind of an interesting thing that they do in the games, though. In Personas 2, 3, and 4, it doesn't really impact. Not that I've seen the idea of you having another personality that you kind of go about. I haven't seen that it's impacted the story, at least not in 4. I can't speak for 3, but in 5, it's a pretty big aspect of the game that you have this other life that people see and know about, and they don't know it's you, but they know that thing exists. It's a pretty big aspect of the game, actually. The reality of the person behind the mask, who they are, what their goals are. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they criminals? Stuff like that.
Well, that kind of is a broad thing that happens in these ones. Is you talked about like the social elements, social links. The confidant system being done with tarot cards. I always thought was an interesting point, like that they kind of embody or behave similar to a major arcana from a tarot deck. And also, something to point out is, if I remember correctly, all of the protagonists from 3, 4, and 5 are all fools.
I think that's true.
Symbolizing the journey they take and the misfortune they have along the way.
And 5 is also a little bit different. For one, I mean, I think this is also the case in 3 and 4. It's also the Fool is a wild card, so that means they can use different personas of different arcana. And the Fool, so that's one of the reasons why it's a Fool. And secondly, an interesting thing with Persona 5 is, a Fool is not necessarily an idiot. A Fool is a person who points out things, social trends in the court without getting in trouble for doing them because he's appointed by the king to do so. The Fool's basically, so the Fool, or Joker in this game, is basically pointing out all of the problems with society through his actions and bringing them to the forefront of the collective unconscious, which is a big thing in Jungian psychology, the collective unconscious. Okay. Any other things that you'd like to touch on that I've kind of hinted at, or anything that you'd like to add to what I've said? Or do we...
No, I think I'm good as far as like the general stuff. Like, I'll definitely add more once we get into the more specifics.
So we've kind of touched base on what each game is and what the overarching concept is. Personas are this, are another half of you. Shadows are a part of the psychology that exists. It's not necessarily, that is oftentimes undesirable. Like in each game, each person, although not necessarily each player character, has a shadow, and that shadow it represents the parts about them they don't like. Persona 4, that shadow becomes the persona, actually. And it becomes the persona for one of the player characters as well in Persona 5. but it's embracing something about yourself that you have tried to deny or push back, and saying that is, whether I like it or not, it's a part of me, and I have to accept it. So that's kind of what the whole shadow thing is. But now that we kind of talked about all the overarching themes, we can talk about the 3 games in the series that have the social link aspect to them. And I know that they're not technically the beginning of the series, but for all intents and purposes, the game really picked up in popularity with 3. So we're going to say it's the beginning, even if it's not. So we'll talk a little bit about 3, a little bit about 4, and a lot about 5, because we have both played through 5. Okay, so let's start with Persona 3. You've played through it, so I'm going to let you take the lead in the discussion and just throw out some lines if you want to delve into them, on my thoughts on it. I'll let you kind of guide us through this game, and 4 as well.
Yeah. So, 3 is interesting because, like we've said, there kind of is a unique twist to each of them. 3 takes place again in Japan, like all of them, but there's a specific town in which experiments have taken place. Basically, these experiments created a phenomena called the Dark Hour. And said phenomena, basically at midnight every night or X time, most people become they get into coffins. I'm like, how to say that? Most people are in a coffin, and the world outside warps and changes into basically a world where the shadows are. Some people are not saved by the coffin, so for whatever reason they're out. Some people have a reason, some people don't. But those people can get attacked by the shadows. They feed on them, and then in the real world, after the hour has passed, they're basically catatonic. So this one takes place with a group of high schoolers forming a group called C's, which stands for, what was it? It's like Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad. There it is. So their point was to explore this other world, and specifically there is a tower in it called Tartarus. It is like this massive tower that is like a labyrinth. I believe it's on the school, if I remember right. But the whole point is them exploring that, and kind of figuring out different things. They, like I said earlier, they use evokers in 3, which is basically a gun. But this one plays on there being like an experiment that caused it, rather than like 5, it just exists. And if I remember right, 4, it also just exists.
I think that's correct.
But that's like the really short gist of it. It's like the point is exploring Tartarus, figuring out what is going on, and I mean there's obviously a lot more to it, but that's kind of the general concept, because 3 isn't what we're hitting hard tonight.
Okay, well, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, well, except that I've understood that the tone of 3 is really, really dark. It's the darkest out of all of them. It's very sad, very depressing, and like I'm pretty sure at the end, like the protagonist dies. Like he dies, and that's like it. He dies in terrible, horrible pain, and like it's kind of depressing. Persona, or I should say, the mood of it is like really, it's blue is a predominant color in the game, so it's kind of sad, depressing, and that's also the color that's used on the box art. Really just kind of a kind of a sad game from what I understand. It's really dark and fairly gloomy. But it was like the first game that like really changed the way that the structure of the game worked. So, Persona 3 did also have its own like re-release with something called FES, which doesn't stand FES, which doesn't. It's not like an acronym or anything. It's short for festival. It has like an epilogue, in which the player controls a second side character named like Aegis, I think is her name.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different than the other re-releases. Like for Persona 4 Golden, they completely overhauled all of the gameplay was completely overhauled. They added in this extra time period you could explore. I digress because we're not talking about 4 right now. But they made the main edition in 3's re-release was an epilogue.
Yeah. What was the other? There's also kind of a commonality between 3 and 5 with the end of the world. Like they're both end of the world fighters, and they both have potential short endings. So I guess I can speak just to 3. Like 3 has the option for you make a very key choice in the game, and if you choose one way, the game just ends then. And if you choose another way, there's like an extra month of game time, because that's how like the game like it has that social sim element of it to where interact with each day and behave that way.
I'm not totally certain, but like if there's also one of those moments in 5, but it's like really obvious what the right choice to make is. So if you get the bad ending, it's because you don't know how to play the game. So
yeah,
it's pretty obvious. If you aren't trying to get the bad ending and you aren't just a total dick, you'll probably get it. You'll probably get the good ending. So it's not one of those trick things. It's pretty obvious what the right choice to make is. Yeah, Psyche. They do have the protagonist die, but it's not the only JRPG where that happens. Like, I'm not gonna say anything about it, but you should play Chrono Trigger sometime.
Oh no.
Anyway. But yeah, I think that's really. I don't have a whole lot to say about it because I haven't played it. I'm interested in playing it, but I have not. So. Persona 4. A little bit about that. A common theme to that is, like I already mentioned, it's the most lighthearted out of all of them, and it's reflected in the color scheme. It's bright, it's yellow, which is kind of odd because like the outfits of each of the characters is pretty drab and black, but it's the color scheme, the overall theme of the game is lighthearted relative to Persona 3 and 5. And it's also the theme of the game is discovering the truth. Truth is it's a huge aspect of the game. Like what goes on in the TV world or whatever they call it. People don't know, why are these people, what is killing these random people in the game. The way that people get their personas is confronting a harsh truth about themselves, among other things. Truth is the overarching theme of the game, and it pretty much pervades almost every non-interpersonal interaction you have in the game. Every story, all the story is pervaded by it. So.
Yeah. It for like also kind of it starts like a murder mystery basically.
Yeah, it's kind of like the interaction between the characters is kind of like a Mysteries Inc. sort of thing, you know.
Mm.
I think that's what they were going for, anyway.
But I don't. Do you want to go over like a brief bit of it, or do you want me to on this one as well?
I'll go over a little bit of it since I had played through a couple of. Well, only played through one Palace. Persona 4 is more lighthearted. The protagonist goes to this new school. He's from the big city, which is probably Tokyo, but we don't know. Tokyo or Kyoto or something. And he's this little no-name town in the middle of nowhere. I can't even remember what it's called because it's not a real place. And he basically he's really cool. He looks cool, and everybody else thinks he's cool. And he gets involved in this. In the middle of all this, the town is going through a murder mystery. Basically, people are dying in really weird ways, like their bodies are hung upside down from TV antennas, and there's not really any connection between the victims.
Yeah.
They try to string some stuff together, but there really isn't anything that connects them. Meanwhile, there's a rumor going around that if you turn on the TV after midnight on a rainy evening, that you will see your soulmate. And so everyone does that, and they see a girl, I think it's a third-year student, and then like she dies the next night. And it's a main character's love interest, his senpai. That's not what senpai means, but he was his senpai. And he did like her, so. And it kind of kicks off the whole plot. Like they find out, they find her persona in the TV world, and she says some crappy stuff about him, like, "Oh, I hate him. He's just such a pain in the ass," or whatever. I think that's actually what she says. And he being Yosuke, he's the character who had a crush on her, like is like, "Oh man, she's so mean. Why does she think all those things?" And then he encounters his persona, and he's like, "Oh, I hate this town. I'm from the big city, and I hate everything," because he's also from the big city. And he's like, "I don't think that stuff." And then you beat him up, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess I kind of do." So that's the overarching theme of it. Characters.
Did you just curse?
I was quoting something.
You haven't cursed in so long.
I was quoting something.
Oh my god.
I was quoting something.
Okay, bye.
There was a quote, and it was a quote, by the way, because I'm pretty sure she says that exact thing. So he realizes, oh, she thinks this about something, and I think this way, but only in my deepest heart of hearts. So they kind of learn what causes all this stuff. Oh, if you have some deep, dark secret, and you aren't willing to admit it, and you say, that's not really who I am to that part of you, it will turn into an evil monster, and you'll have to fight it, and it'll kill you, probably. So.
Sorry, I'm still kind of giggling about Psyche running in.
Like, whatever.
It's 4 being like a TV world is interesting, and I take that back. I forgot 4 also has something that's like world ending. So there's always like this commonality of like it starts off seeming it's small or like isolated individuals, but there's actually something that is attempting to actively end the world.
Yeah, it's something like, well, I mean, I wish that part of me wishes they kind of like go a little bit smaller, like, oh, it's just threatening to blow up Japan or something. But no,
Yeah.
it's the whole world always. Then we can talk about that later. I don't remember. I have not played through the whole game. I don't even know who the villain is yet. But yeah, so big portion of the game is about truth and uncovering the truth and confronting it, being honest about who you are to yourself. Kind of an interesting thing that I've heard they do, because I've not played through this part of the game, is one of the main Persona users is like, it's like hinted that he might be gay, or at least has very feminine interests, and his confrontation with the truth is, this is a part of me. I even if I'm this big tough biker dude, I can also like these other things that are not as masculine, quote unquote masculine. And it's an interesting take on it, because it was one of the first, even possibly interpreted one of the first characters in a game that was even possibly gay. Not the first, but one of the first. And it was kind of a big deal, which makes you wonder why they kind of backed off of that in Persona 5. And actually kind of regressed a little bit. But it was an interesting take on it. There's only like one or two other games I can think of where there was an actually gay character in it. As an aside, Earthbound is one that has a character that is gay, but he's not explicitly stated in the game as being gay. It's just the creator after the fact said he was. So it's very uncommon for that for a game at that time to deal with that, and now it's pretty commonplace. Like in Last of Us Part 2, Ellie is like openly gay. Like, and I can't think of a whole lot of other mainstream games where the major character is not straight.
Right. Yeah, they almost always do that.
In Persona, but from Persona 4, which came out in 2011, that was a pretty big step forward, considering, the perception among gamers of various groups that aren't like them. So it's kind of a big deal for them to be willing to take that step forward, or at least hint at it. So it's kind of an interesting thing that they did.
Yeah, it is. I think like the little bits of pizzazz in each game are nice little touches. I think the little uniqueness of them all.
So
the main course.
Yes. Anything else you want to say about Persona 4?
I liked 4. 4 was overall, I thought it was a good game. That's the one I played the most spin-offs as well. Like there's like a fighting game for it that's interesting.
There's also there is another dancing game.
Yeah.
It's not explicitly a spin-off of Persona 4, but it is kind of there's the Persona Q Labyrinth or whatever it is, which is like a crossover with Persona and Persona 3 and 4. I'm pretty sure Persona Labyrinth, Persona Q2 had like all three of the big releases.
Right. So now we can move on to Persona 5 though. I'm good on 4.
Yeah. So Persona 5 it was a huge deal. There was a lot of leading up to it in the press, a lot of promotional images and kind of iconic things. Like one of the things I remember most about it before I even bought it was like the image of a character who would become known as Joker, like blood running down his face and kind of a almost wicked grin on his wicked grin And I thought,
Yeah.
is this guy a villain or is he a hero? It's hard to say.
5 had such a tonal change to it. It felt like, because you said like 3 was kind of had like this dour tone, and 4 was like heartfelt in a way, and a bit more like upbeat. 5 is like very, I don't want to say edgy, but like 5 is like cocky almost.
There is a lot of that.
Yeah.
Something that kind of sets 5 apart from the others is the previous games, like the canonical name of the protagonist in Persona 4 is you, by you. So it means something in Japanese, but like it also kind of has a meaning to us in English, which is like, oh, he's just, he's a stand-in for the player. But in 5, he I don't know if he has a canonical name. He's known as Akira in the manga and Ren in the TV show. Most commonly, he's just Joker though. So Joker's like has a really defined personality, and any choice you make is kind of a riff on that personality. He's kind of a dick, really sure of himself, really self-confident, really rebellious, and like you said, cocky. It would be a good way to describe him.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry.
Oh, did you hear any of that?
So I heard you talking about. Sorry, I typed in chat, but I probably should have just said something. I heard you talking about like the main character, and then I left on his canonical name, which in the anime at least is Ren.
Right. The anime is Ren. The manga is Akira. Most people call him Akira because his last name in the anime is like Amamiya, so people call him like Mamma Mia Boy on the Persona 5 subreddit. So Akira I think is more popular, but like in Smash he's Joker, so it's pretty much what everybody goes by anyway.
Listen, he's Joker in all of our hearts.
Yes, he's Joker pretty much to everybody, and it's the only name that they call him in the game when they call him anything besides this guy. Which I wish that they would have programmed in some names, but that's beside the point.
Program Gil.
Or something. It's kind of weird that like they all like the only name they call him this guy constantly.
Yeah, that one, it always feels really like it breaks up the flow of a conversation when they say like, haha, this guy.
You don't know what this guy's been through, and then on the screen it says your name. So yeah, maybe in Persona 6 they'll fix that. I don't know, because I like in Fallout 4, I think that they had like characters being able to say certain names if they were from a certain list. Maybe they'll do that in Persona 6. I don't know. Yeah, he's really arrogant isn't really the right word, but he is very self-confident. I think he does become a little bit more arrogant the longer you play. Almost all of his responses have like a cheekiness to them. Some of them have only cheeky responses. That's kind of the kind of a common thread through the Persona 5 protagonist, at least.
Yeah, it's like yeah, I think that's the best way to describe 5. It just has like this cockiness and confidence to it, and like you said earlier too, with like the smirking, like that happens multiple times throughout the game, and like part of me actually is like, I'm like, lean into that a little bit, because the main characters in these games can feel really paper thin. Like they're just supposed to be like blanks that you insert a personality on.
It's supposed to be a role. You're supposed to role play, but JRPGs have a pretty long history of not having self-inserts as main characters. Yeah. So Persona is kind of a weird holdout in that respect. So kind of going back to that, having a character with a defined look, and what's interesting about his design, if you were gonna play spot the main character with this game, you'd probably pick everybody besides him.
Well, yeah, he's actually relatively normal looking on his day to day.
Yeah, like compared to everybody else in his party, he looks thoroughly bland and uninteresting. Which is, I think, by design. He's supposed to look kind of uninspired as a character. He blends in. He's supposed to try and blend in so that he can live a life that is free of any drama. It's free of any problems, but he ultimately ends up, he can't be the person that he needs to be, what he wants to be, so he becomes the person he kind of needs to be. But it's also kind of supposed to be kind of like the thing that which you don't expect is what he kind of becomes. Like with like Yoda in Star Wars, you don't expect him to be some sort of Jedi master because he doesn't look like it. You don't expect this guy to be some sort of the leader of the Phantom Thieves of Hearts because he doesn't look like it. He doesn't look like an anime pro tag. He has black hair. He has gray eyes. He wears glasses. He has all the other main characters have like flourishes in their uniforms. There are Shujin uniforms that identify them as main characters. He doesn't. Not a single thing. There's nothing about his appearance that is unique, other than the fact that you know what he looks like from the starting point.
Right. I guess, do we want to like roll through the story kind of beat by beat for this one?
A little bit. For those of you who don't know it, or really, this is kind of a backdrop for how most Persona games start, but it is at least the first couple of lines of description apply to most Persona games. But here's a little bit about Persona 5 specifically, just kind of a brief overview. So, second-year high school student who you get to name begins a new life in Tokyo after being expelled from his last school for plot reasons. Along the way, he acquires something of a spirit of rebellion, which is a persona that he uses to steal the hearts of corrupt, though not always evil, individuals. He teams up with other Persona users and forms a group known as the Phantom Thieves of Hearts. They use this group to reform society with their newfound powers. That's kind of the overarching theme of the game. They basically form a group and they steal the hearts, the desires of corrupt individuals, and that will, since they have no central desires, no central corruption, they are able to move past their evilness, or their, not necessarily their evilness, but something they use. It's a psychological term. There's not a distortion in them. There's no distorted desires. So with that, they're able to move forward as a person and begin the healing process. Usually, it results in them going to prison, but in some cases, they just become normal people.
It's like their incorruptible justice, effectively. Because that's such a theme and a topic in Persona 5, especially, is justice.
Justice, yes, big thing. The palace, so something, and we'll touch on this a little bit more, but each of these evil people has something called a palace. It's basically a bunch of shadows coalesce around people with extremely distorted desires and views of the world, and that person creates something called a palace, which is basically a dungeon that is themed in a certain way. They're all kind of themed around things where a big heist would take place, or at least most of them are. The first one is a castle So it's a traditional palace. But the second one's an art museum. Third one is a bank. The fourth one is a tomb. Fifth one is not really heisty, but it's a spaceport. The sixth one is a casino. Seventh one is a ship, a cruiser. So a lot of these have have like a built-in heistness to them that serves the idea of it being a heist movie sort of thing. Like every heist movie centers around stealing something important. Most of them, like stealing a work of art, or tomb raiding, or they're set in a casino and they steal from the vault. It's kind of the idea of the game. Most of the palaces are big places where a heist movie would take place. That's kind of an interesting thing.
It definitely it ups the showmanship of the game because of that. Like it makes things each palace feels exciting, and who doesn't love a heist?
Mm-hmm. But in order to make it feel like something where you would be heists usually are about people who are not usually good people, but are people that you want to kind of root for. But this game can't have any of that, because it has to be the desire of this heist has to be ideologically pure. So they're stealing. So the Phantom Thieves are usually presented as being good, and the people who they're stealing from are usually bad. For instance, the first heist is a guy named Kamoshida, who's a gym teacher at the school, who's a massive douchebag. Just incredibly douchey. I don't think that I've hated a character as much as Kamoshida ever. At least at that point in the game. I hated him so much. He was so awful. Spoilers, 'cause we're gonna get into spoilers, obviously. I don't know if we tagged it as spoilers, but there's gonna be spoilers. He basically it's hinted that he sexually abuses one of his students, and she tries to kill herself, and she almost succeeds. So and that's in the first part of the game.
Yeah.
So
no, Kamoshida is built to be hated.
Yes.
His whole personality is it's power abuse over high schoolers, and then it's physical abuse and it's sexual abuse. He is the trifecta of asshole.
Yeah, he's he literally beats his students. He tries to begin a sexual relationship with one of the main characters, On. He gets Ryuji, another one of the main characters, he gets him kicked off of the track team, and he gets the track team dissolved. So he threatens to expel the main character. He basically tries to screw over every one of the main characters at this point in the game. So he's the worst. Although he's not the worst, he's just the worst at this point. So they do a really good job of setting him up to be kind of a douchebag. But that kind of plays into something that's a theme throughout the game. All of the palaces are centered around one of the deadly sins, quote unquote. Although some in less obvious ways. But if you look at the achievement list, they're all listed as X of Y. The Castle of Lust. So he's a pervert. So his deadly sin is lust, although he really has a bunch of them. It's not necessarily the corrupted desire. The thing that corrupts him, his treasure, is in his case a gold medal. He was a gold medal Olympian, and he can't ever go back to being that. But here at his alma mater, because he went to school here, he's treated like a god. So everywhere around the world has forgotten who he is except here. So he basically uses it to become a king of a castle, because he, in some ways, is more powerful than even the professor. I mean, not the professor, the principal.
Principal, yeah. Yeah, I was about to say, because, his palace manifests as a castle in which he is the king of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see in the castle all those elements of specifically lust, but also just power dynamics.
Mm-hmm. And all of them have that. This isn't so, like, okay, vanity is kind of sometimes thrown into the deadly sins list. The next one is the Palace of Vanity, or I should say the Museum of Vanity. It's sometimes included, sometimes not on the list of 7 deadly sins. But the whole idea is Madarame, who is the curator of the museum and its greatest contributor, he just steals he's a plagiarist. He steals ideas from everybody, and he becomes really powerful and well respected in the art community in spite of having never actually created any significant artworks in his life.
Yeah.
And he basically has these kids on the hook, and the second they try to get out of his clutches, he makes it impossible for them to be successful because he's well respected. Hey, thanks for the raid, Outburst. We're just ranting about Persona. Although ranting isn't really
Outburst?
I think.
I know that guy.
Oh. So all of them have a deadly sin they center around. His is a little bit less obvious, and I think that, what's it called? The next one is even less obvious. It's gluttony, but it's not really gluttony. It's like an abstract interpretation of gluttony.
Because the third one feels more like greed.
But then there's another one that is greed later on. So
it gets a little bit more like abstract, like you said. Something else to point out about the second palace. This is where you start collecting like the first one. You get your whole team pretty quickly. You get all your 4 characters, because you can have 4 active characters at a time. You get those 4 pretty fast. The second palace is when you start getting new characters, and you can start rotating people out and like benching people. This is where you get Yusuke, who is an artist to a T. Weird, eccentric, and out of it most of the time.
True. Very true. And so on and so forth. Until you get to the 6th palace, you get a new, the 6th palace is the last one where you get a new party member. But and you never get them in between, ever. But, oh yes, and he's poor, mostly by choice because he spends all of his money. People buy him stuff and then he buys lobsters. So yeah, that's kind of the idea behind the plot. It's somewhat episodic, but there is an overarching plot. So it doesn't, and the first section of the game deals with them trying to establish themselves. Really, the first section is just Kamoshida. They want to overtake him, overthrow him, and they basically plan to be done with it after that point. Then they realize, well, we could do something about this afterwards, so they decide to make it a formal group. Then you get to name your group. Persona, and then the next one, each one until they get to the next one, they basically are just trying to one-up what they did before. The third one is kind of the same thing. They're trying to one-up themselves. But and after that point, they've kind of attracted national attention. The next one, their next heist is they're trying to overthrow an internet hacktivist group called Medjed, and and by doing so, they have they become an international sensation, and most people around the globe have heard of them. By the time they get to their 5th heist, they're basically just doing whatever everybody wants them to do, and it leads to their downfall to some extent.
Pride cometh before the fall.
Yes.
But also,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, their naivety comes out pretty early, because they like instantly get caught after the 2nd palace. Like, the 3rd palace, and the character that joins during that one is Makoto, and Makoto finds out who they are.
Right.
Like, finds out they're Phantom of Thieves, and then after that with Medjed, Futaba finds out who they are. Like, they're constantly getting caught because they're great at their job, but also very bad.
They're not experts. The only reason other people haven't been able to find out what they're doing, is because they don't know them, and their methods of attaining what they do are impossible to catch unless you witness it happen.
And Ryuji only has one volume.
Unless you are a Persona user. In other words, like them, and thus possibly a co-conspirator. So
yeah.
I feel like this is kind of a good time to talk about what exactly they do, because I don't think that we've made that clear.
No.
Basically, I kind of hinted at this. The game centers around these persona users who, when they use their personas, they literally don a mask. The mask, and when they take off the mask, they can use their persona. So the persona users, they gather together and they discover the existence of palaces in what's called the metaverse. In these palaces, the metaverse is like a super consciousness or subconscious area that's very similar to our world, except in certain areas where there's big distortions. And these distortions center around a particularly powerful individual in the metaverse who has become so corrupt and distorted by their desires that they take on a new form. This form is like the palace leader's form, and it's usually some demonic entity of sorts. It becomes and each of these palaces is based on a real world location. The real world location of Kamoshida's palace is Shujin Academy. He's a king of the palace. The real world location of Madarame's palace is his atelier, which is a shack, but it's a museum where he showcases all of his artworks, which are not actual art, but the people that he uses to become famous, in a vain attempt at achieving fame and fortune. So on and so forth. Each of these palaces represents something to the individual. So what the Phantom Thieves do is they go into these palaces, find I don't know what they call it exactly, like an infiltration route, I think.
Yes.
And then they send a calling card to the person that they're trying to steal from. Doing that basically causes the treasure around which the entire palace is built to manifest. Doing so allows the thieves to steal it. Before they steal it, though, they have to defeat the palace ruler, and doing so allows them to escape safely with the treasure and then cause the palace to crumble. And that's basically the central gameplay loop. They discover an evil person, a strong or a distorted person. They discover that he's the palace user, what that palace is. They go in, they send a calling card, they go back in to get the treasure, and then they leave. And society improves, so on and so forth. basically the overall idea of the game.
Yeah.
There's other things that go into each palace, but those are neither here nor there because some palaces are different than others. All of them are different. Some of them have different mechanics than others.
Right, yeah. All of them have their like uniqueness to them, but they also do kind of share a similar formula, like you said. I think oh God, I'm trying to remember. There so okay, here's a good question. If we're talking about palaces,
Mm-hmm.
did you have a favorite and least favorite?
I think my least favorite was probably the spaceport. Mostly because, well, first of all, I didn't like the music very much. I thought it was kind of annoying and repetitive. I freaking hate hunger as a status ailment, and the only place in the entire game where you can get hunger is in there, and it drives me nuts. It's not even like endangering. I feel like it's also like the longest palace, and I don't play the game for the palace for that element. I play it mostly for the social stuff. So
Yeah.
I felt like it's a freaking long palace. They're all kind of long, but that one's the longest. I think that's probably my least favorite. My favorite, though, I kind of like either Futaba's palace or the I like the bank too. Mostly because of the music for the bank, though. But
True.
The bank has great music. I did like. Okay, I also. Well. Okay, so I liked a lot of the casino, but since casinos are generally seen as like being a certain way, and there's only like they're just basically a big floor of people play slots. The areas behind the scenes, which were kind of bland and uninteresting, but the music is great, so it kind of makes up for it to some extent.
Right.
I still would probably stick with my first two, though.
I think yeah, I'm like you. It's harder to choose a favorite than a least favorite. I think probably one of my faves is the casino as well. Maybe the boat.
The boat was interesting. That is okay. So the fifth one was long. That one is wow.
It's long.
It's long. I did it in one day, but it was not a short day.
Yeah. Well, and then after that you have the final palace, which feels even longer.
The actual palace, I think, is shorter, but since you might have to go through parts of whatever it's called,
Mementos.
Since you hadn't finished it, it might take longer.
I made that mistake.
Yeah. I read guides and I just learned not to do that, so I only had to do like a couple of floors.
Yeah, I just a real quick highlight on that. I never even fought the Reaper once in my first playthrough. I didn't know what it was.
I only did it because I wanted to get the achievement, but it's pretty much impossible to beat without playing flu season.
Yeah, it's like the only time you have a chance. I think my least favorite is also the space station, just because God, like you said, some really annoying shadow abilities, a lot some RNG stuff, and then like a really weird traveling system that like ended up getting me ambushed more times than not.
The airlock thing, it took me a long time to get through that because I wasn't actually thinking through the puzzle, so I was just like hitting buttons. But once I actually sat down and thought about what I was doing instead of just playing through the game linearly, like, oh, if you do this, it's the first thing I come across, so it must be the first thing I'm supposed to do. But after I got past that point, it was not too bad. But there's timed stuff. The boss fight is timed for some reason.
Yeah.
I liked that there was that this is the only boss fight that lets you use type advantages. So if you memorize those, you're in good shape. But something that drove me insane was that you could never all out attack them because the boss himself was considered an active participant even though he wasn't actually fighting. So you could never all out attack because you could never hit him. It drove me nuts. And that it could do like this big bang burger attack and like OHKO you, and that's something that's kind of an issue that I have with the boss fights in this game, but we'll talk about that later. But overall, it was just it was a slog for me.
Yeah.
It also, since the others previously had like an emotional tie to them instead of feeling like something they were literally forced to do, they felt like, oh, we're doing this for the right reasons. But this one, they were doing it because the public said you have to do it. And they also, you kind of grow to hate Okumura, but not really, because Haru is his daughter. She's one of the main characters, and so he's like really greedy and a douchebag, but he's also not like viciously evil and horrible like some of the people. He's the most clearly just distorted, other than Futaba, obviously, rather than being like the most evil out of all of them. But there wasn't a strong emotional draw to that one, so it felt like the most forced, the most chosen one narrative out of all of them. Like, you have to do this because you're the Phantom Thieves and you're destined to clash with evil. Instead of oh, this guy sucks, we're gonna take him down.
Right, and also that one I think also especially I disliked because it brought one of my like least favorite characters into the game. Like, Haru came in so late, and I never grew like a connection or a tie to her as a character.
Yeah, she's more than halfway through the game, so
yeah. And I like to the point where like my first playthrough, I didn't even get a confidant with her.
Yeah, I only got like a couple of points with her.
But yeah, that one's tough to get through.
And then like there's the most forced conflict of the entire game at that point. And that's,
oh my god, Morgana's depressive episode?
Yeah, it's something. Okay, it's something that's like important to the overall plot, but they absolutely should have hinted at it earlier in the game, because this is more than halfway through the game and it's the first time we're hearing about it. And he like gets into it with everybody, and everybody has to apologize to him, but he's the dickhead, and he's the one who's being a total jerk to everybody. But I don't get it. It's stupid and it's forced, and it literally, the outcome is no different. The only reason it's in there is for plot, so that we can explore Morgana's origins a little bit more. But we could have done that better if it happened earlier in the game. But it has to happen late in the game. But it doesn't happen, like, then they have another conflict later on after, spoilers, Okumura dies, and they have another conflict. Why couldn't it have happened then, or has been a lead up to that? He rejoins the group and everyone's happy. And then he comes back, and after that, then they have another blow up. It should have been earlier in the game, or it should have been during or very close to the blow up later on. It doesn't make a whole lot of narrative sense.
It was so odd. But yes, Psyche, the cat was depressed, but his like concerns with himself and his place in the group, like, I don't think that that's forced. But how they made it come out, and like you said, you have no impact on it in any way. It doesn't matter what dialogue option I choose, what I do. I cannot change this. It is just meant to facilitate me to the next plot point. Like, that stuff was a little frustrating because I'm like, this is a JRPG. This is supposed to be like the type of game where choices kind of matter. Like, it's supposed to matter a little bit, right? But yeah, it was super shoehorned in, and then it brought in Haru, who was like the like quiet, like timid character that just stays quiet and timid and has like the personality of a cardboard box.
Yeah, she's the least, I think, interesting member of the Phantom Thieves. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you want to make this character interesting, she has to come in earlier. I feel that if you're going, what they should have done is made a more interesting, for surface level interesting character come in later.
Yeah.
Like, I know for plot reasons, Futaba has to come in when she comes in. But they could have had, like, Yusuke come in later, or they could have had her, I don't know. There really aren't actually a whole lot of members of the group, so it's hard. And it would be kind of a disservice to Makoto to have her come in late, but it almost feels like she would have to, because people latched onto her so quickly, but they didn't latch onto Haru. But I didn't latch onto Haru as much.
No, I wish that, like, because I don't think we've talked about this in the podcast. We talked about this off the air though before. Like, Hifumi was supposed to be a character.
Yes.
So I'm just like,
I wish that,
but what?
I don't know why they decided not to make her a character.
I would rather have her been a character than Haru,
And
like a playable character.
It's so weird because she is like the only high school age confidant who is not a member of your team. It's very obvious that she was scrapped, and people thought that when they were bringing in a new high schooler for Royal, they thought maybe they would reincorporate Hifumi into the game, but they didn't.
I have no idea why they didn't. That still kind of bugged me. We got Kasumi instead, who is like, I won't go too much into her, but she is like very archetype-ish and one-dimensional so far, and I'm not a huge fan of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I liked Hifumi a lot, but something for that kind of thing. That was my least favorite palace, though, and that whole plot point, it was narratively useless because if you're gonna say, well, some people might say it hints at further conflict. Okay, but everything's resolved before then. Like, Morgana kind of makes peace with the fact that he doesn't know who he is, and he will never know who he is, and there is no underlying conflict in the group at that point. The conflict comes back into it because of what happens after Kumura dies. So it's not like there's an unresolved plot thread that generates further conflict. It's the conflict is resolved, and it's just that does not foreshadow future conflict.
Right.
The existence of conflict that gets resolved does not foreshadow the existence of future conflict. So what they needed to do was they needed to have it later on, or they needed to have it earlier on, or they needed to hint at it earlier on. It didn't make any sense to have it where they did, and it didn't play into the overall theme of what was going on in that palace. They were getting kind of full of themselves, and he left not because he felt like they were getting full of themselves and they were arrogant and they were losing sight of what they're supposed to do. He kind of left for the opposite reason. They were having second guesses about doing this stuff because they didn't really know if they didn't know how they felt about targeting Okumura, and he's like, F you guys, I'm going to start my own cult with, with blackjack and hookers. And,
exactly.
So it didn't really feel like it made much of an impact. In the story, it made no impact because nothing changes. The status quo doesn't change after it. It was a forced conflict.
So, with all of that, do you actually want to start going into characters then?
I think it would be a good transition, a good segue, because I don't really think that talking about new elements would be fitting at this point. Maybe we talk about that before playthroughs, but we can talk about the characters.
Oh, that though, then do we start with the two bozos?
I don't know who you're talking about specifically, but
I love Ryuji and An as much as the next guy, but they're Dumb and Dumber, and you know what? That's okay, and they should just probably date each other because Ryuji is like very protective of his friends, and I like his characteristics of he's the best friend character, which is across the board in Persona. There's always like a best friend character who's usually kind of loud and like very loyal.
right.
But he's also incredibly dumb.
Yeah, he's not. Yosuke is actually pretty smart.
Yeah.
But at least he has common sense. Yuriji's as dumb as a rock.
He just yells.
Yes. I
Well,
actually, some people hated him. But I actually really didn't hate him. I mean, I understand they didn't like how obnoxious he was, but I mean, he's pretty funny, and what is it? What he says? He says a line like so frequently throughout the game that like somebody made a compilation of it, and there's like,
Is it Balkan?
no, it's for real. He says for real like 30 times.
For real?
Yes, he says it so often that like
Yeah.
we have like someone has like a 1 minute compilation of every instance where he says for real, and it's kind of funny. I think that the voice acting, as an aside, in this game is really pretty strong, and his character is pretty. I like him for the most part. I didn't have major issues with the obnoxiousness because, for the most part, most of the other characters aren't quite that level, so it doesn't feel like it's oversaturated.
Yeah, his. Sorry, Swampy's distracting me. His character. So okay, really quickly on the voice acting thing, I actually did like the English voices in this. Some people don't really, but I did enjoy them. They had some weird pronunciations of things, which I'm like, okay, why?
Yeah,
But
it had a pretty weak localization, but the voice acting I thought was pretty strong for the most part. Like, there's some really strong veteran voice actors like Cassandra Lee Morris for Morgana.
Matthew Mercer.
Matthew Mercer is excellent. I think that he does the best job of anybody. Let me think who else is pretty.
Makoto's voice actress does good. I forgot her name, but she's also kind of tenured.
Yeah, she's pretty tenured. The guy who does Sojiro is good. Also, he's also the voice actor for what's his name? Like the commander in Monster Hunter World.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's also, so a lot of them are really strong voice actors. As an aside, if you've ever played Persona, something that will catch you as being a little bit odd, if you play like Persona 4, when you hear Igor speak in this game, you'll be like, that doesn't sound like Igor.
Yeah, no, the voice is different, and I hate it.
Well, and there's a plot reason for that, because the actual voice for Igor is the same, but this guy isn't really Igor. So I didn't know, it didn't sound like it should be the voice that they chose for him didn't sound like it should be the voice that they gave to him.
Oh.
Or the voice that didn't seem like the voice that he should have, but there's a reason for that.
Yeah. All I want to is my creepy old welcome to the Velvet Room voice.
He's not that. He's creepy in a different sort of way.
Yeah, right. But
almost sinister. Almost sinister.
Yeah. He has the tonal elements of it, and then like how he speaks to them. that being said, An is also very dumb,
Oh
but
yes.
she like Ryuji and An are himbo and bimbo for
Yes.
quick wording. Like she again is like very loyal and like energetic and like happy and all those fun things, but
Hmm.
she just really has no common sense as a character
No.
and like gets into more trouble than she should because of it.
Hmm. Yeah.
But
They have.
she's the lovers.
Yes, she's the lover's confidant. Ryuji's the chariot.
Yes.
She is the lover's confidant. Um, and then so it's hard to say. There is a difference between them because you meet Ryuji before you meet any other NPC other than like teachers and Sakura. You meet Ryuji very like he's the first Persona user you meet, and
Yeah.
you kind of it's one of those. It's for that reason that it feels like it would be odd for me to not develop a relationship with him because like you have a shared somewhat traumatic experience extremely early on in the game, and
Yeah.
like of course they'd be friends because of that. It'd be kind of weird if they weren't.
Yeah.
So An is a little bit different. The thing with the point in the game where she and the protagonist kind of become where they kind of latch onto each other a little bit is when he says, or I should say, is when the protagonist confronts her after he sees her. Like, I think like she's on the phone with Kamoshida, and he kind of comforts her at that point. So their connection is not. I think that she's like not really the default. I feel like the default lover is probably Makoto, but she's kind of like second default.
Wait, who is the default lover? Oh, Makoto?
Yeah, I feel like she kind of
Really?
hinted, well, okay, because it's hinted that she has romantic feelings for him at some point in the game, even if they're not in a relationship. She's the most concerned about him after or I should say, she's the most relieved to see him when he makes his dramatic re-entrance into the scene, but after he died, even though they all knew he wasn't dead. But she is the also kind of default, but not really. It's hard to say exactly. With Morgana is the guide character. Like he's literally put into the game to help guide the protagonist to be the hero, so to speak.
Yeah.
Again, that's I think literally his purpose in the game, and both plot wise and meta narrative, like what his existence in the plot was created to be. He's supposed to help the protagonist become a Persona user, become competent, so that he can defeat evil or whatever.
He was a means to an end. His personality isn't too bad though, overall, and he's the magician.
Yeah, he's his motivation is what ultimately causes him to defect from the group, which is kind of weird. His motivation is not immediately apparent when he first joins the group. It seems like he just wants to go around destroying palaces, but it's not clear why. But his actual motivation is to discover he believes he's a human and he lost his true form, which is not the case. So he's kind of trying to find a place where he belongs and what that place is. Eventually, he comes to the conclusion that that place is the group, the Phantom Thieves, and specifically the friendship he builds with Joker is what he's kind of become, is where he feels like he belongs. So his journey is more of a self-discovery sort of thing, I think.
Yeah.
He wants to find what he is, who he is, and where he needs to be. And he, I think, kind of accidentally finds where he's supposed to be, because he's literally created with the purpose of guiding the fool, and he accidentally stumbles upon him when that fool happens into the palace as well.
Yeah.
So I know you have, like, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, go ahead.
You have feelings about Yusuke. I don't know how you feel about him. I kind of like him.
I don't.
I know that you have reservations about him.
I don't hate Yusuke. Actually, it's not even my most disliked, but he's very, very, very eccentric.
Yes.
Which isn't a bad thing, but it does make his character pop up in interesting ways at interesting times, and I'm like, oh no, Yusuke, what are you gonna do?
Right.
Like, he concerns me. I worry about him. But overall, he's not a bad character. He is very, like, off the wall, and I think I spent the most times in the game going, like, what are you doing to Yusuke? Like, the most times I was confused at what was happening until it happened, and I'm like, okay. Like, when he first,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, when he first, like, asked you to go to Mementos, he's like, I want to paint there. I'm like, but why though? I'm like, wait. Like, I'm imagining myself being like, hey, you want to go into the dangerous place, just the two of us, so I can paint? You're like, no, I don't. But that's my shtick. You can go ahead.
Yeah, his is like one of the only, if not the only, times when a confidant literally drags you into the metaverse. There are other instances where it happens. I think that it's either Sojiro's or Futaba's requires that you go to the metaverse, but
Hifumi's does too.
well, they all require you to advance the confidant, but it's something that you do as you adventure through Mementos. But I think that Futaba's and Yusuke's actually force you into the metaverse during the confidant itself.
I gotcha.
Not as a requirement to advance the confidant, because pretty much all of them that aren't Persona users require that you go into the metaverse. But anyway, with Yusuke, so his initial motivation, well, he didn't really have one, because his initial motivation is he just wants to stay with Madarame, and then he learns that Madarame sucks, and he doesn't want to do that anymore. So his motivation, I think, is to kind of create good art. And that's kind of like his entire character arc. And that's kind of what the journey you go on with his whatever you call it, with his confidants. Like there's this one scene where they go to a church
oh my god!
I want to capture the image of Christ on the cross being crucified, and like, so Joker, he asks him, pose like Jesus or whatever, and Joker's kind of like he kind of like half-heartedly does it, and then Yusuke's like, no, where's the passion of the Christ? And like he does like this incredibly flamboyant gesture. And I think he kind of embarrasses Joker at that point. Like, are we really doing this in a church? I think actually
he embarrassed me as a player.
Yeah, and the preacher, I think, comes up and like says, like, starts talking to them. It's an interesting moment. Let's just say that. Yes, this happened in the game, Psyche.
Yeah, it's a real scene.
This actually happened. This
is early on his confidant too. It's like in the 5 levels.
4 or 5. But the whole point of it is he's trying to create a work of art that is worthy of his mom, who was the creator of I don't know what it was called. the woman thing. I don't remember.
Sayori.
Sayori. Or Sayuri.
Yeah.
She was the actual artist who created, but Madarame stole that from her. Stole credit for it. But he later finds out she was the creator, and he wants to recapture that. You know, the beauty of that creation. And he tries to do it by going to Mementos, and they're like, hey, this thing that you created sucks. It's bad. And he's like, oh, I'll never be able to financially recover from this. And over the course of their confidant, he's just trying to find inspiration, and then eventually he does, and he creates a nice piece of work, and everyone's like, oh, you did a good job, Yusuke. You should be proud of yourself. And that's kind of his character. It really motivated primarily by the pursuit of art. He's anchored in a particularly strong performance, which makes him more likable, I think. But he is definitely eccentric. Fortunately, he's not like a manic pixie dream girl, so it's not like just let's go catch fireflies without clothes on or something like that. It never gets to that weird level of just utter bizarreness, but he is definitely is an eccentric character.
Yeah. He's built to be very, very eccentric.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Oh God, who is after him? Makoto. Here is where the podcast goes off the rails, chat.
See what here, folks.
Makoto is my favorite character. I think that's probably pretty obvious, but I like her a lot because she is the most practical thinker and one of the smarter characters in the game.
Definitely one of the smarter thinkers.
She also, so I think some people really dislike her confidant arc for her the friend she makes being all she does is talk about the friend or whatever, or thinking that's annoying. But for me, it was okay because Makoto is somebody that has so little life experience, and her whole arc is about her going, how do you make friends? How does she make friends?
Yeah, she doesn't have any friends. She's she is a student council president, but she's a social outcast.
So it's she is working through that and trying to figure out how to live. She's freed herself from these chains of being stuck in this performance-based life where it's I have to meet these check marks. And I think that's another reason why I like her, is because I resonate with that a little bit of it's mostly self-imposed as well. But let me actually try to enjoy my life and try out these things that I've never done, like going out with friends or going out on a date, and stuff like that. So I found her being intelligent, but also being curious and unknowing. I was these are good traits that enamor me more to this character because I want to see them grow. Like Haru.
And there's also an aspect to that. Okay, so Futaba's really smart, but a lot of her intelligence is just we see that she's able to do things really quickly that other people have difficulty doing. So you don't actually get to see her the way her brain works. You just know you know she's smart. It's been stated. You witness things happen, so it's a fact. Okay, don't question it. But with Makoto, she comes to a conclusion based upon evidence, nothing else. Based upon just a hunch and a hypothesis, who the Phantom Thieves are.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the bits, Corey. Hope you're having a good day. Yeah, but she, so you get to actually see her intelligence at work. She's one who usually solves most of the problems in the group.
Yeah.
She's rational, and she's also kind of, she's tough. She's the one who draws a line in the sand when she sees whatever his name was. What's the third palace's Kanashiro?
Yeah, Kanashiro.
She's the one who becomes ultimately pissed off at him because of a character motivation. She's the student body president. She feels a desire to protect the people of the school, and he's trying to ruin their lives. And she's not going to take that anymore.
Yeah.
Even though he has of all of the characters who come into the game because during a palace, she has the least connection with him directly. It felt like believable because of pre-established character motivations, because you see her interacting with other characters even before she becomes a member of the Phantom Thieves. Another thing about her, I think she has one of the more believable motivations. She and her sister, who is also a main character in the game, want to be like their dad, right? But she hasn't lost sight of what's important, whereas her sister kind of has. Her motivation is partially because her sister has a palace. She wants to break that up, but she becomes attached to the group, and she doesn't want even after her sister's palace gets destroyed. Although I guess it doesn't actually get destroyed. She sticks around and she wants to see it through because she doesn't have friends outside of the group, so she sticks around for that reason, at least in part.
Yeah, it's like her whole initial support structure is her sister, and like her sister is absent a lot of the time. So she's kind of left to herself. She also is a character that sees a lot of growth, I feel like, throughout the game.
Right. I agree. So she doesn't have any friends early on, but you can see, I think you can interact with her, although you don't interact with her as a named character. You can interact with her like as early as like the first chapter, so to speak. But the more you interact, or I should say, the further she goes, she's one-track minded. She wants to get into college. She wants to get into a good school because that's what she's supposed to do, right? But she changes over the course of her confidant as well. She wants, instead of just being going to school, she wants to be a law enforcement officer like her dad was. So she takes the lead from her dad more than her sister does, even though her sister knew him for longer. So kind of an interesting parallel to be drawn between the two.
Yeah, it is. Well, and then that's not even mentioning the romance element of it. Because if you romance her, it's also very sweet and very innocent. Of like, again, like, I am not used to this. I don't understand what's happening, but I'm here for it kind of mentality.
Right. Yes, Psyche has a backlog of unfulfilled tweets.
There's a lot. Like a lot. But
yeah.
She also has a cool persona system. I liked that she was like a brawler type that was strong, and then I used her in my party like the whole game through, just because of the nuclear damage, and then the buffs and healing abilities as well.
Right. Yeah, so she's like, Morgana's just a straight healer. The only thing, I mean, he can use wind damage, which is nice, but the fact, or I should say, but she can also buff and debuff, and also She can heal, and she's also fairly strong. Like, I feel like she gets more crits than other Persona users or than other party members as well. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
You know, it would have been an interesting concept act. I don't know what it had. Well, obviously, well, no, I guess it already kind of exists. The confidant abilities that you get from confidants that like boost you during combat are really cool. But I was thinking, I'm like, imagine with like you romance Makoto, you get like some of the stuff that like Fire Emblem's characters get, like where you get bonus XP and stuff like that when they're fighting next to each other if they like each other.
Yeah, there really isn't any of that, and it's kind of annoying because the incentive to increase confidence with party members is sheerly because of it's only because of the characters themselves. The bonuses you get from most of them are pretty I don't care about most of them. The only advantageous one is actually sometimes disadvantageous, which is like Ryuji. If you get to a certain point, you can skip through fights. But that also means that you basically just destroy every lower level persona you come across. And sometimes you want to fight them so that you can, get that persona. But if you have max personas, then it will just say, oh, you can't get this persona. You have maximum. It doesn't let you switch between them. And I know I don't want to be fighting a bunch of scrubs, but they're gonna run away from me anyway. So if I'm going after them, it's obviously because I want to. So I wish you could turn that ability on and off. But like the abilities you get from other confidants are usually really good. Like from the Sun Confidant, you gain extra negotiation abilities. From Hifumi, you get the ability to run away sometimes. From the Gun Kid, you get to do this really cool thing where if you get the jump on an enemy, you get to start off the fight just raining hellfire on them. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference in the fight, but it's just it's a fun dynamic sort of thing that you don't get from other abilities really.
Yeah. Well, what's the Futaba one where you can just instantly have a hold up too is really nice.
Hers are different because she isn't a party member that like fights, so sometimes hers are actually useful usually. But the other characters are oftentimes not so much. I don't think that Makoto has anything interesting for her confidant at all. The only useful thing is the baton pass, which is the same for everyone. At level 2 confidant, you get it. And then there's the whatever it's called. And then there's at level 6, I think you get the ability to sometimes snap people out of. Which was so useful for me. The Harisen recovery, I think.
Yeah.
But it's also extremely unuseful because at level 6 confidant, you will automatically snap people out. But of like any whatever status thing. But the problem is that a lot of your confidants at level 6 by the time you get to the 5th palace, a lot of your you will be at level 6 with most everybody except for Haru. But and here's the big problem: the big attack, the big OHKO attack by the Mega Executive will kill you. Will pretty much kill you instantly unless you're guarding, or unless you have hunger as a status. And unfortunately, they can snap you out of hunger. So if you're at level 6 confidant with anybody, they'll sometimes just, I have hunger, great. Oh, now I don't anymore, never mind. So now I've got to defend. This is completely random, you don't get to choose what happens.
Right, it's like RNG, and like all JRPGs, RNG can really hose you in this game.
Yes, big time. So I think that there's 3 more non-villainous characters.
Mhm.
Well, 2 more non-villainous characters and 1 semi-villainous character. Next one you get is Futaba. Futaba's kind of like the hacker girl.
Super hacker.
Super hacker. She is. If you thought that Makoto was socially awkward, she takes that to the 10th dimension.
Oh yeah, she's a neat.
Yes, she's a neat. I think she would actually probably qualify as Hikikomori because she literally doesn't have any interaction with the outside world until she meets you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, she lives her entire life online.
Yeah, just hiding inside.
And a lot of that has to do with plot reasons. But even after you complete her palace, she still is a little bit socially awkward. So obviously, it's not completely because of depression. There's also a little bit of extra going on there, and a lot of that's just because she's socially awkward. So
A lot is because she what?
It's just because she's socially awkward.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and like her confidant stuff is like. It's very much embodies that, like her getting more used to being outside because she uses you as like her lucky.
That's actually, I don't think that has as much to do with her confidant. Her confidant, I think, mostly is like her. I think it's mostly like her, like trying to reconnect with an old friend or something. Most of it, anyway. I think that a lot of that's the stuff that probably should have been her confidant was not. What should have been her confidant is you trying to help her move from somebody who is a hermit, literally. Well, she's also the hermit arcana, go figure. To becoming somebody who is a semi-functioning member of society. I feel like that probably would have been a bit more useful to her character. As a confidant, but then at the same time, I understand that the only way that she advances through that is if the character gets in, if the player gets involved, which means that there's a potential for her to be an incomplete character by the end of the game if you don't intervene in her life. So I get where they were going with that, but there's also an aspect which it would have been more resonant, I think.
Mm-hmm. I can totally see that, honestly. What did you think of her being a support character instead of a playable?
It's nice and it's also frustrating. I kind of wanted to see her in combat, but at the same time, it's having a support character is nice. I wish that you could have a bit more control over what she does instead of it being completely RNG. But
yeah,
it was fine. I thought it was okay. It wasn't the worst thing in the world.
I sat on one side of the camp with her because she is a divisive character in the community.
How's that?
Because of romantic options. So it seems like most people, not everybody, but a lot of people either see her as the little sister type, like of character, or like the truly best romance option. And it's like those two groups butt heads seemingly because those are such varying degrees.
Obviously.
Yeah,
They're pretty much opposites.
Yeah. So like I fell in the camp of I felt like she was this like little sister that you were like role modeling for. So like I never ever attempted any like the romantic stuff with her, which she was I think overall she was a good character. I liked her overall as a character. I understood like the neat behavior and like why she was so socially awkward and stuff like that. And the how do you do fellow kids video game references she would make. But Outside of that, I think overall I liked her as a character.
I do too. It is kind of it's because it's hard. There, you feel like there's an aspect which it thinks that where the game kind of wants you to be romantically involved with her, but there's also an aspect which it definitely is trying to push the idea of her being a little sister, sort of. So
Yeah.
she also kind of has a little bit of character development through Sojiro's confidant as well. So, and that makes it even more apparent. Like, oh, maybe romance is not a good idea. So, but the last character that you get is Haru, and I think we both kind of have similar feelings about her being definitely the least utilized. But you can't even get her confidant until you get to the 6th palace. You don't start her. They should have started her confidant a lot earlier.
Yeah, like her confidant should have started before you could have her as a playable character.
Mm-hmm. Or even like before, like during the 5th palace, but you can't. I understand a lot of it has to do with like her taking over the role of Akumura Foods, and that can't happen unless her dad's dead. But at the same time, it's really, I don't know. I didn't like it because she needed to have a strong character hook at that point in the game. And it's not that she doesn't have anything going for her, it's that she comes in so late and you don't get to even start doing her confidant until like you've started the next to last palace, or then what you think is the last, I don't know what, but it's a late game palace, and it and also it's annoying because you can't advance her confidant, so you can't baton pass with her in the 5th palace. It's all around, and her character is probably the least interesting because, well, what's her motivation after she defeats her? After she gets out from under her dad's thumb? I mean, does she have one? What purpose does she have with joining the Phantom Thieves? A lot of them join because they're social outcasts, and people. Yeah. She's kind of a social outcast, but she fits in, I think, the least with all of them because the first 4. They have a shared interest in trying to take down Kamoshida. Yusuke doesn't have any friends because he's weird and awkward and definitely eccentric. Makoto is career focused. Futaba literally doesn't know anybody who isn't on the internet. but Haru, I mean, she kind of doesn't fit in with other people. But it's not because of any of that other stuff. It's because she's rich. Yeah. So, they should have introduced her earlier on for sure. And they didn't even hint at her existence. And they literally didn't hint at her existence until after the 4th palace. Until after, like, around the Waikiki Beach thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just not good. I like I'm an outcast too because I'm super rich. And it's like, one of these things is not like the other.
I mean, I'll have an issue with it. It's just, it doesn't feel as, like, strongly motivated as the others.
Yeah, it's just... Yeah, I'm like you. I just don't think her character is fleshed out enough. I think she comes in late, and I think she's like one-dimensional. And then just as a personal preference, she is like a character archetype that I just don't personally like all that much.
Yeah, not my favorite either. She's, the quiet type, but without having a whole lot of real, meat, emotion to draw you in. So
yeah,
these cats are so stupid.
Oh man.
Um,
So,
what were you gonna say?
oh, I was gonna see if you had anything left to say before moving on.
Yeah, not really about her. I don't. I think she would have benefited from more fleshing out and being either earlier in the game or, well, appearing earlier in the game or appearing earlier as a confidant or appearing earlier as a.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is an example of them sticking too rigidly to their formula because,
Yeah.
oh, okay, we do this palace, we have to have somebody else come in as a confidant. Instead of like saying, oh, she can be a confidant without being a party member, and then she comes in as a party member and it's kind of a surprise. That would have been more interesting, I think.
I think so too. I think that she just needed to be like reorganized and how she was introduced. And then maybe she could have a bit more depth that way too. So you have more time to work with. But
The the last character though is an interesting character. Akechi.
Goro himself.
Yes, the whole game he is presented as being kind of antagonistic towards your group, but not outright hostile. And then comes a big reveal later on that he actually is a persona user and he wants to help you guys. Look, catch, he actually doesn't. He is actually working with the bad guy and he wants to bring you guys down from the inside, and he tries to kill the main character. And he's got semi-villainous intent.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you're wise to it, you pick up on that early on because of like the hints that the game gives you, but then also it's like, this is how we deduced it.
Yeah, so they deduced it, and it's
Yeah.
like, it's not necessarily. I think it's not necessarily. It's kind of convoluted, but not necessarily to a point where it's incomprehensible. But it's more just kind of possibly unintentionally humorous why they came to that conclusion. He mentions, okay, so basically the thing is, people when they see Morgana in the real world, they think he's a cat, but he can't. So they just, whenever they hear him talk, they just hear him meow. But people who see him in the metaverse can then hear him talk when they see him in real life. So the reason that they came to the conclusion that he had encountered Morgana before is because they hear him mention pancakes, which is something that Morgana mentioned earlier. And he couldn't have heard because Morgana's the only person who mentioned.
Daddy Hunkrat.
Thanks for resubscribing, Jay. 16 months, that's a long time. I think I said that earlier. But nobody else talked about pancakes, so Goro Akechi could have only heard Morgana say it. But he couldn't have heard Morgana say it unless he had seen him in the metaverse before. So that's how they came to the conclusion that he was the traitor. Other than the fact that he's the most, nobody else in the party had a reason to betray them. So the person who's most likely to betray them is the person who is like the odd man out.
Yeah. So it's, I think he, I didn't mind him. I actually thought he was well written.
No, I liked him.
I liked his his antagonist stuff, his ultimate motive, how he was his unique abilities of causing, like, again, this is a spoiler heavy part, chat, but causing the mental shutdowns, the two different personas he had, which is the first time we've seen anybody outside of our main character like that.
It's kind of like an antichrist figure almost.
Yeah, like he, I liked his character overall, and then he was able to kind of see the light in the end, which is fine. He had like a redeeming moment. But also, no, I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, his battle felt cheap. But no, his battle was actually kind of long and hard.
No, it was really hard.
Yeah.
The main issue that I have has less to do with him. It's like he dies and then he's not ever spoken of again. So
yeah.
I kind of wish that they had addressed some of that later on, but he died at the culmination of his character arc at the same time. So there really isn't much to be done about that. He is, I think, the only thing I have an issue with is that it's in terms of his behavior as his persona being a literal persona, the whiz detective or whatever.
Yeah.
It is so obvious. It is so obviously not an act, and so it feels like they kind of pulled the rug out from under you when they reveal he's a villain, because he seems like a legitimate. Like there's not any real hints that he's bad at any point. So it seems kind of like I'm pulling a rabbit out of a hat when they do it. He's not hinted at being villainous early on, so when he inevitably, like, any opposition he presents to your group is opposition to the Phantom Thieves because he thinks they're a menace to society, rather than, of course, we learn later on he opposes the Phantom Thieves because he as a metaverse, as a persona user, literally opposes their goals, but he presents it as being something else. So it's just never apparent that he's duplicitous at any point until the reveal happens, which some people might not take issue with. I don't think that it's inherently bad. I just maybe wish that there was a little bit of planting earlier on that would have led you to believe maybe he was a potential traitor. I thought that it was interesting that they kind of had he had the wild card also. He's a very it's interesting to see him become progressively more unhinged. When you first meet him, he's like really nice. He becomes more stern, and then when he betrays you, he seems like a typical mustache twirling villain. And then when you confront him in the cruiser, he like goes completely bonkers, and he like almost, the thing about his persona is that he basically doesn't just cause mental shutdowns, which is what happens when a person is killed, when their shadow is killed. What happens to him is he can also cause like psychotic, I don't know what they call this, breakdowns or something. He basically causes people to go crazy, and that's what his other persona, Loki, does. So it's kind of an interesting twist on it, because the quote-unquote Igor gave the wild card to two people, the protagonist and Akechi. The one will lead the world to good, and the other will lead the world into destruction, and the other one being Akechi. So it's kind of an interesting, I don't know what you would call it, a twist on it. I thought he was a good character, an interesting character. I only wish that you could actually have real interactions with him instead of just scripted stuff. I think that they fixed that in Royal, though. Like, his confidant advances as you choose to advance it, not whenever.
Yeah, I believe so. I haven't actually gotten that far into Royal yet, but from my understanding, yes, it does.
Yeah. So that's all the main characters. There's villains. I don't know if we have enough time to go into depth on any of them. I feel like we've already talked about. Most of them are like, they have some depth to them, but they really are just their plot. They exist to advance the plot mostly. The only real exceptions to this are Kamoshida and not the big bad, but the main antagonist, even if he's not the final boss, Shido. Shido is. I said earlier that Kamoshida is the worst until he's not.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the raid, Inferno. I'm not PsycheSiren, I'm Teeth Whitener, and I'm here with Gilgamesh, King 07, talking about a game that we really like, and that would be Persona. So, specifically Persona 5.
Thank you for the raid. Sorry, my husband's ranting, but thank you. Bye.
Anyway,
I love you, honey. Don't make that stink face.
you too,
at me.
bye.
Don't make that stink face.
But with Shido, he actually is the worst.
Yeah. No, like everything is made to be like vile about him.
Oh, he sucks so much. He's just absolutely so bad, and that's a good thing. He's bad, but he has a god complex, and he becomes the way he is because he legitimately believes that he is like the second coming of Jesus, basically. And he's not just, and it's actually kind of a thematic, or I should say kind of he's kind of got a meta thing going on. So his goal is to become prime minister and make Japan like the, hey, Mitchie, thanks for the raid. We're just ranting about video games.
Mitchie! Sorry, okay, I'm sorry, but it's Mitchie. I had to say hi. Okay, I'm going now, okay.
Bye. What I was saying is, Shido is, he wants to make Japan #1, the biggest nation in the world. So it's kind of a timely game because it comes out, and I'm not going to get into politics, but it is a very political message. He is nationalist and bordering on fascist, and it comes out right around the time of the 2016 elections, which we're not going to talk about, but it kind of is an interesting parallel between what we were dealing with in 2016. And all this is happening, I think, at almost the exact same time in terms of the actual date of it. Like the big confrontation with Shido happens like in, I think, November 2016. So kind of an interesting parallel to be drawn between the two. He is the instigator for the entire plot, basically. At some point, I mean, it's thoroughly hinted throughout, but it's revealed at the or I should say close to the end, that the reason that Joker got kicked out of his previous school was because of Shido. Shido is basically what happens is Shido was visiting a bar in the protagonist's hometown, and he starts like harassing a woman who I think is on his staff. And Joker literally just goes over there to step in, and Shido falls over, gets like, or I should say, basically beats himself up, and ruins the protagonist's life. So he's the prime mover. He is actually the main reason for his own downfall, because if he hadn't done that, the protagonist would have stayed in his hometown, and none of the events of the game would have happened. So he literally caused his own demise by being the prideful, arrogant prick that he is.
true, honestly. It's kind of funny how that works out.
And I think it's poetic justice because the thing that caused him to be, or I should say, the thing that he basically defines himself by, his pride, is what literally leads to his downfall. Because like I said, if he hadn't done that, none of the things in the game would have happened, and he would have been prime minister, and he would have been able to do whatever he wanted to do. The reason why he couldn't is because he's prideful and he's an awful person, and he basically tried to destroy the life of some random high schooler because he couldn't stand to be embarrassed like that in public because he's so full of himself.
Right. It's like he like embodies. I feel like he embodies more than one sin.
Oh,
It's
he
like
does,
not.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's like not only pride, but like greed, envy,
Lust, gluttony, because he's drunk when you first see him.
Yeah.
He embodies a lot. Pride is definitely his first sin, though. I think that his is probably the only clear-cut. Like the rest of lust is kind of iffy. Like Kamoshida's like on a power trip, but he's the most lustful, so fine, we'll stick him with lust. Vanity is like debatably. I mean, I don't even think it really qualifies as one of the 7 deadly sins, but okay, he's vain, fine. Gluttony is definitely iffy. It's probably more greed. Wrath, it's not really Wakaba's palace. She rules the palace, but it's not her palace, so
Yeah.
it shouldn't really be a palace of wrath. It feels more like if anything, sloth, right?
Yeah.
But it's not. It is called the Pyramid of Wrath. Greed, fine. Okay, greed I can get behind. Envy, sure. I mean, I think that envy is the primary sin for the elder Nijima. Sai, couldn't remember her name for a moment. Pride, though, he has a lot of other stuff, but his primary sin is pride. No questions asked. I think any of the other characters can kind of just be kind of glossed over because I don't think.
Yeah.
I really like Fumi as a confidant, but I think most of the confidants are actually pretty good. So it would be, if we talked about one, I feel like we'd have to talk about practically all of them. So it seems like it would be a good idea just to move on from that. So I'm gonna talk really briefly about the new stuff they added in. If you're interested in playing this game, but for some reason you haven't because of reasons, whatever they may be. Hey, thank you so much for the follow, Midnight Saber. My wife, who is the actual streamer here, would normally say, please don't expect skill, hopefully entertainment. I don't know if I can say that because I feel like I'm better at video games than she is. So, but if you come back, don't expect skill. Yeah, frick you, husband. But yeah, a few of, like, if you're not really sure about the game or if you have not been able to get into it, I think the base game itself is like $20, so it's not expensive. If you're interested in the game and you want to get a new experience or a more complete experience, Royal's out. It's still $60. I think Walmart sells it at $50. I don't know why they sell games at $50, but they do. So, but a few new things that come to it. They brought back negotiations from previous Persona games. They have Hold Up thing, which is like a cool little heist thing they threw into it, where if you knock down every one of the enemies, you can either all out attack them or negotiate with them. Sometimes that allows you to take on the personas. In previous Persona games, I think the only way to get new personas was through fusion. But you fight shadows that are actual personas in the game. So you can sometimes, if your level is the same or is equal to or higher than them, you can negotiate with them and take them on if you answer questions correctly. That is... It led to some fun interactions, so I don't hate it. But at the same time, it could be really frustrating because it's not readily apparent which answer is what they want to hear. If you go based solely upon the voice they use, that's not always what matches up with what the character. If it's like an irritable persona or a cheerful persona or whatever, they like hearing different things, but there's not an answer that's always so obviously one or the other. So it can be difficult and sometimes frustrating.
Yeah, it's super annoying actually. Like, I was getting flamed by my chat because I kept messing it up. But I'm like, there's no clear-cut answer.
There isn't.
I even looked up the guide, and it's like, oh yeah, the cheery one wants you to answer like aggressively, and I'm like, what's the aggressive answer here? I'm like, what?
I feel like the options. I know that they did it for like to make it fun and you know and different. I feel like there should be like an answer that's just like answer aggressively, answer shyly, answer neutrally. There should be that option, but I understand why they didn't do it. It just makes getting certain personas really frustrating. So that's new. That came back. The palaces are not procedurally generated. They were kind of themed in Persona 4. I think they were not themed at all in 3. They were kind of themed in 4, but they were still randomly generated, and there was no, there were no puzzles because of that, which kind of makes it feel every single palace feel kind of sloggy. In this game, every palace is different, and they have different themes and different puzzles in them that are all the same through each playthrough. If you really like procedural generated stuff, they still have that in Memento. So if you like that for some reason, I don't. They still have it. It's just not in the palaces. So the palaces are all different and themed, and they have puzzles. They change social links to confidants, but they function exactly the same way. The setting is an actual named location instead of just some random place that doesn't actually exist on the map. It's Tokyo. So a lot of the locations in the game are based off of real locations in Tokyo, like one of the secret hideouts. Which, I mean, come on, guys, it's not a secret hideout. You're talking about big Persona users in public. But one of the secret hideouts is like a walkway near the Shibuya station in Shibuya, but that exact place is a real place outside of the station. So it's kind of interesting because you actually visit some of the places that you see in game. The art style, I don't think I've ever seen a more interesting art style in terms of a UI. There's not an obvious inspiration behind it, but it works. It works really well. The transitions between scenes are always interesting because it's not usually interesting because it's not just like a static loading screen. Like when you go from one location to another in a palace, you'll usually see like Joker drop down from above the screen and like coat the screen in black when he brushes off. It's kind of hard to explain. Or like when you get on a train, you see people walking, and you see like silhouettes of people walking and with umbrellas if it's raining, smoking. You know, they have interesting things going on that make it not awful to sit behind a loading screen. I really wish other games would do that, because most of them don't. Loading screens are boring and uninteresting, and they're oftentimes really long. But with something like that, it makes loading screens not seem as long, even if they are all over the place.
And dear God, do JRPGs have loading screens? So anything to alleviate that sort of like strain or boredom is much appreciated.
Right. There's also the music is in previous games. It's very inspired by J-pop. If it's not just straight up J-pop, this game is jazz inspired. The music is very jazzy, and there's still some of that. Like this track that's playing right now is kind of J-poppy, but it still has a pretty strong jazz undertone. And a lot of the tracks in the dungeons, some of them are different, but they, like the theme in the bank is pretty heavily influenced by like smooth jazz. And the game in general, I don't know what her name is, but the singer is really, really, really good. She doesn't always speak very clear English, but she's got a really good singing voice. So it makes the tracks really compelling.
River in the Desert.
Yes, River in the Desert is an incredible song. And I like that it appears twice in the game, so if you didn't get to experience the fullness and greatness of it the first time, you at least get a second chance at doing it. It's great. I really, really like the track, and I like almost all of the music in the game. It's got such a strong soundtrack. It's really catchy too. I don't think there's ever been a normal battle theme in a video game that is as catchy, and even though you hear it a billion times by the end of it, I didn't ever get tired of hearing it. And you hear it a lot. So
That's honestly true. I didn't really get tired of it either. Same thing with like I know Swampy got tired of it a little bit because she would meme on it whenever I'd be playing in the living room. But Beneath the Mask playing during like all the idle time, and then the instrumental.
I like that track a lot. It's really nice, chill music.
Yeah, that one's another one's really good. I will say Royal also has some good music so far. I don't like the intro cinematic song as well, but they have like a new battles piece that's really good too.
So did they get rid of the old one, or they just sometimes change it? Or
I think sometimes changed if I remember right.
Okay, well I'd rather them not get rid of it because it works, but okay.
Yeah.
It's when it comes to the music though, it's almost all really, really good. I didn't really care as much, like I said before, for like the individual music, the dungeon music in the spaceport, but it's really strong in the fourth dungeon and the third dungeon. Like really strong music, and like I really liked it in the third dungeon. I think that by itself made the third dungeon more interesting for me. So it's a really, the music in this game is a really key component to it. It adds to the feel of the game. It makes it feel more. It's heist music really, which changes the dynamic of the mood as well. There's stealth elements in the palaces also, which is very different. It's not a stealth game, but since to get the upper hand on shadows instead of like hitting them with a sword or something behind them, which it's really irritating in Persona 4 Golden trying to get the upper hand on shadows. But in this game, it's pretty straightforward, and combat is something that the game also does really well, because even though turn-based combat can sometimes get really boring and sloggy, because it's so streamlined, it makes combat go really, really quickly. it's streamlined. You can skip through a lot of animations if you don't want to see them, and it's if you've already beaten a monster before and you know what its weak point is, the game tells you, so you don't have to like guess at who to or what kind of attack to use. If you use a baton pass to get somebody who has an attack that's strong against it, it'll automatically highlight the person who is strong against that particular enemy. So it's really streamlined. So combat, which can be really annoying in some games, is not nearly as problematic. And also something that drove me nuts about Persona 4 Golden, it defaults to having the AI being auto-programmed for the other game, or I should say in Persona 4, and I'm like, why? Why would you think I don't want to say exactly what they should be doing? But it was even worse, I think, in Persona 3 because you can't. The AI for your opponents is completely pre-programmed. Like you can't never tell them what to do. Like what? I feel like that doesn't make any sense, and it's not really doesn't really fit in with most RPGs in that respect. But but Persona 5, you can, as a default, you have complete control of your party, which is nice.
It just it's like a bunch of quality of life improvements that they made in 5 that are so nice. So
yeah,
it's overall been a big improvement. I guess we got 20 more minutes.
Right.
Do you want to talk about how we felt like about the game, like a review almost, like overall, like story wise?
I think that's a good idea. We kind of hinted at some of it, but I think that
Daddy Hunkruck.
Hey, thanks. Soggy. Sorry, I can't read from where I'm sitting. Thanks so much for the resubscription. Really appreciate it. We're just ranting about Persona. Rant really isn't the right word, I guess. I think I've already said that tonight, so I'm not going to say it again. Yeah, I don't really think I think that we should probably do reviews. We can talk a little bit about our playthroughs as we talk about the reviews. But I think we should start with things we liked, and then things we didn't like, and whether or not we would recommend the game at the end.
Do you want to go first or me?
You can go first. I've talked a lot.
Okay. So Persona 5 overall. Okay, really quickly, I have to just comment on. There is a dick monster. There's actually 2 of them. One is like a small cluster of them, and then one is a big boy.
What's the small cluster of them?
Oh, it's like something. It's called throbbing something.
The throbbing. It's like the throbbing king of desire or something.
Yeah.
It is actually a penis. There's the torn king of desire, which is even grosser because you encounter that like extremely early on. You don't realize that it's a penis monster but then you encounter the later version. You're like, oh my gosh, that thing was a ripped in half penis.
Yeah, like it has like the one of them, like the one that turns into Mara is like, it's like on a chariot. Yes, it is absolutely called that, Psyche.
It is. I'm not kidding. We're not kidding.
So that all being said, I liked Persona 5's style. I did like its art style, the color schemes, the transitions, like all those like artistic pieces to it. I really liked the character designs. I thought overall the game looked really good. It was one of the few JRPGs that I actually was able to really, really get into and beat. It didn't feel like I had to grind excessively to win the game.
Oh, at no point did I feel like I had to.
Which was like, for me, is a major plus. So like gameplay wise, it didn't get boring. Now, I binged the hell out of it, and I've kind of set it down for a couple weeks now, or actually probably over a month now, because I started playing through Royal after I beat the first game, because I probably played a little too much back to back. But yeah, for the start of quarantine, I put like 70 hours in that game real fast.
Right.
But beating through a game and beating it in like 100, 105 hours did not feel as tedious as it might have on paper. I really, really enjoyed the music. We talked about that. The music, top tier in the game. It won awards for a good reason. It goes in at the right times. I like both the upbeat songs and the like sad, emotional songs. I think overall the story was fine. I thought it was good. It wasn't like reinventing the wheel by any means. But I liked the story. I think I liked enough of the confidants. I had some like bones to pick with certain characters. But like overall the confidants were there, and like that's the most two important things, right? For me at least in these types of games is like social sim is a major piece of this game. So if the social like links suck ass, I'm not going to enjoy the game as much. And then the actual gameplay of like fighting through the palaces, all the palaces felt different enough to where they didn't feel repetitive.
Right. I agree.
And honestly, the like final push with like the last palace and a half, if you will, felt really rewarding. Like I felt like I had to fight for it and it wasn't easy, but I felt accomplished when I beat it actually.
Right.
So I think overall, I think for both of us, we're going to be like, yes, we very much enjoy this game. But I did enjoy this game from a like layman perspective, but also from like a trying to be critical perspective. I think overall it was a good game. It was definitely an 8 or higher game. When you're looking at it even through like a critical lens of if this is a genre of game that you like, you will like this game.
Right. I think that much is true. If you like JRPGs, this is I don't think that could make a higher recommendation. The only game that I think could maybe be a more important, like the only game I think I might, and I don't think I would, but I might give a higher recommendation to in terms of the JRPG genre is Chrono Trigger, but this game is just so, as a genre game, it's almost perfect. And I also think that it has enough crossover appeal to where it can be seen as a success to people who don't particularly care for the genre, because it gets rid of the grindiness of most JRPGs. So it can focus mostly on the plot, which is good. It's a good plot and it has a solid thematic tie to it, with strong characters and strong villains also. The villains in this game, even though they all basically serve the purpose of advancing the plot, most of them are really strong, and some of them are really good villains. So I think that the stuff that the game does well, it does exceedingly well. It has a really attractive art style. Like I said before, I can't think of any other game that has an art style quite like this game. I can't think of any other thing that has an art style quite like this game. It seems totally different than almost any other piece of work I've seen in terms of the art style, and the UI is constantly interesting. So it doesn't feel like you're just going through a bunch of menus when you try to find some stuff. Sometimes that makes things a little bit difficult to navigate, which is a slight drawback. But since it's not boring to look at, it makes it more it makes it less problematic even when it's difficult to navigate some of the stuff.
Yeah.
I think that the music is incredibly engaging. There are very few, if any, weak tracks, and there are a ton of really exceedingly good tracks. it's that alone makes the game worth the purchase because it's just the music is fun and it engages you quickly. Like from the opening cinematic, the music gets you. So it will very much be a game that it will engage you on that level at the very least. I think that the quality of life improvements were all solid. There's a ton of stuff to do. The social elements are well implemented. It's not so off-putting. It's not so much of a social sim that it feels awkward to people who don't understand, who have no interest in the simulation genre. But it is, or I should say, but it's in depth enough to where, and I say this with utmost sincerity, everything that you do in the real world, quote unquote, has the potential to impact the game from a gameplay perspective in the cognitive world also. There's not a single thing you do that feels like it's a waste, that feels like it literally doesn't serve a greater purpose. There's nothing that the game implements that's a waste of time or a waste of energy. Everything is very laser focused on what you can do, and that's really good because time management is such a key portion of this game. So if you wind up doing something that's stupid and pointless, then guess what? You've wasted time and you can't get that time back. But since you, at least in your first playthrough, are going to be doing so many things that you won't get an opportunity to do a whole lot of later on, there's not like a wrong choice to be made. It just depends upon how you want to play the game. And since there's so many different ways you can do stuff, it has built-in replayability for that reason. Because you do something and you say, well, maybe this time I'll do it a little bit differently. Okay, well, it changes the game in this way, or whatever. Or I want to date this confidant instead. Okay? Some of the stuff that wasn't as good, because this is like a top 5 game for me. It's an easy recommendation overall. I think it's, from almost any perspective, it's at least worthy of, like you said, an 8. But most people are going to rate it a lot higher than that. And I would rate it higher than that. The game did have some weaknesses. There's an unnecessary amount of difficulty in some of the bosses, and it punishes you a lot. Now, it doesn't punish you as much in this game as it did in previous games, especially I think 3 was like, if you failed a boss, you had to start the whole dungeon over, which is like, what on earth? In this game, it's still really punitive. It's not as bad in Persona 4, from what I understand. But in this game, it's still pretty punitive. You have to start the fight over, or sometimes you have to, like if you didn't prepare well enough in advance, you might have to start the whole day over, which is a major pain, but you can at least skip to the boss. You don't have to go through the whole dungeon again if you don't want to. But on the other hand, the bosses can be really, really, if you slack even a little bit on healing, you can get like party wiped. And this is an annoying thing, and this is just a personal preference of mine. I hate it when games make it so that if the main character falls, the whole game ends. It drives me insane. Okay, well, why can't the healer revive them? That doesn't make any sense. Why are they so important that if somebody isn't telling them what to do the entire fight, that the game ends?
I did hate that.
I hate that.
Yeah.
And Joker's not the toughest of all the characters, so if he gets caught with his pants down, you're dead. End of story. If you're going to make it that way, at least make it so that he's extraordinarily tough to kill. So, I did not particularly care for that. And the bosses could just easily one-hit KO you if you weren't paying attention constantly. And that's kind of a problem with Persona games that I've had the same problem with Persona 4 also. So I really wish that they would be a little bit less I'm not a I'm not a hardcore gamer, and I don't believe in like making games hard for the sake of them being hard only. It just seems like it's an unnecessary barrier to enjoying something. And the game is so good in other regards. I wish that they didn't have that in it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Another thing I didn't really like is less of an issue with the overall structure of the game, and more like just individual little weird things that they threw in there for no reason whatsoever. Like the two kind of predatory gay guys in the game, I don't know what purpose they served except to make people feel uncomfortable about gay people.
Oh yeah, that was weird. I almost forgot about them.
You forgot about them because they're not in Persona 5 Royal, at least not in the States. They've gotten rid of them because it is understandably offensive. And I don't see any reason why they need to be in the game. Especially given how progressive Persona 4 was in terms of that particular aspect. It seems like a step back. I mentioned Persona 5 being kind of regressive in that respect. Persona 4, I don't understand why they felt the need to have that in there at all. So there's that. There's individual little gripes with the story that we've already kind of talked about, like the Morgana character arc at the end of the game was like, or I should say, around the Okumura Palace is stupid and totally forced. It serves no function narratively except to establish that Morgana was not born in a traditional way, and it forces conflict that doesn't need to be there. So you have to introduce it earlier on in the game, or you need to introduce it when the group is moving towards conflict. How about everybody is getting so full of themselves and greedy, and they start losing sight of what they're supposed to be, and Morgana is the guiding force that says, hey, you guys are forgetting what this is all about, because that's what he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be a guide. But he gets swept up in it, and the rest of them are kind of second-guessing. It should be the other way around. They're high school students. They don't know any better. And he needs to put them on the right track. And then when they lose sight of that, he comes back, he leaves, and then he reunites the group later on. That would make more sense narratively. But that's not what they chose to do. So... yeah. So I don't really know about any other things in the game. I'd say overall, though, the game is still really, really solid. It's very addictive. It's endlessly replayable. Maybe not endlessly, but it's easily replayable. And it's one of those games that kind of makes you wonder, like, yeah, I know. Go.
Okay.
Okay, go.
Why does she sound like such a creeper?
I don't know. Anyway, what I was saying is, it makes you wonder why they haven't put it on the Switch, because you can just play a single day at a time and then quit the game and then pick it back up and do it again. It seems like a really good gameplay loop for the Switch, and they don't.
And it was also originally built for like the PS3, so it's not like it's gonna be that hard of a swap.
The it's not, because the PS3 it runs on an old, or I should say the Switch is more powerful than the PS3. So why can't it be anyway? It seems like it's since the game has so many built-in intervals within it, like you go through a single day, then you go to sleep, and then you go through another day. It seems like the perfect game for something like the Switch. So, that's beside the point. It's neither here nor there. But Gil, anyway, would you recommend Persona 5?
Yes, I would recommend it, especially to people that like JRPGs or socially driven games, and people that don't easily succumb to I don't think this is a grindy game, but grind fatigue is the best way I can describe it, because you do have to fight a lot of battles.
Right.
So, yes, I would definitely recommend it.
I would so like this game is a great game for people who like JRPGs. It's one of those things though. The demographic that it's targeting is kind of weird because it's a game about high school, but the characters feel like they're more mature than high schoolers. So
Yeah.
it really feels like it's more targeted at college age kids, but it's a game about high school. So the demographic, I'm not really sure what demographic they were aiming for. At the same time, it was successful, so I don't guess it matters. But I would easily recommend it to people who are a fan of JRPGs, who like anime kind of influenced game. Influence is the wrong word. This game is like it basically is an anime, so it's not really influenced by anime. It pretty much is one. There's an anime based on it. It's easy to recommend for those folks. It's a good easy recommendation for people who like episodic sort of stuff. It's not as easy to recommend for people who are more interested in like a tight narrative, because the game does not have a tight narrative. Not everything that happens is in service of the overall plot.
Right.
Most of what happens is in service of the individual elements that advance the story in that particular segment. It's very episodic. There is an overall plot, but each palace is a self-contained story. So, but it's great. It's a good social sim. It's a great JRPG with a kind of fun Pokemon-style battle element to it, where only problem is it's hard to tell just by looking at something whether or not it's weak to fire or ice, which is kind of irritating. Like in Pokemon, oh, that thing's a rock. It's probably a rock-type Pokemon.
Yeah.
That thing's red, so it's fire. Nope, it's ice. But it uses wind attacks. I don't know.
Nice. I feel that though.
I really wish that the personas, the shadows, like had logical reasons for being their individual type that didn't involve knowing their the background of it. There may or may not be that in the game, I don't know. But the point is, I wish that it was more obvious. But this game's, yes, I know.
It's time.
I know.
Yeah.
It's midnight.
I know. Go away.
I'm never going away.
Go away.
Go away.
I'm almost done. But yeah, the game is an easy recommendation for people who are fans of JRPGs. It's a pretty easy recommendation for people who are fans of RPGs in general. Easy recommendation for social sim fans. And it has enough crossover appeal because it does away with the grindiness that most JRPGs have built into them. So yeah, it's a pretty easy recommendation for me. The only caveat I would say is like, okay, if you don't like the style of game, if you don't like turn-based combat, well, I mean, this is all turn-based combat, so but I think most people are able to tolerate that if they're willing to put up with RPGs, because a lot of people who play RPGs also play like tabletop RPGs, which are exclusively turn-based combat pretty much.
Yeah, it'd be like the genre to be the biggest turnoff.
Yeah, so if you like RPGs, you're probably okay with that, and you're probably okay with games like, you'll probably be okay with Persona 5. So, I don't really have anything else to say about the game itself. The only thing we were thinking about maybe talking about was like spin-offs and like comparing each game to another. I don't think we have time for that.
No, I think you're
murder us if we take.
Yeah, your wife's gonna break down the door, and I don't want to have your death on my conscience.
Yeah. So, but yeah, in summary, Persona 5 is the Persona series is a great game series. It deals with some heavy stuff, but it's not so heavy that it's like edgy. It's not an edgy game at all, but it definitely has an edge to it, if that makes sense, because it's got a cockiness and a visual style, but it's not. There's not just like blood and sex and all that stuff. There's not really any sex in this game at all, except for like implied abuse, which is something that's like heavy, but not for the sake of being heavy. There's very little sex in this game at all, and that's a good thing. So it doesn't feel like it just wants to have a bunch of drugs and alcohol and sex and violence and whatever. It has a very rebellious spirit to it, which I think is also nice. So.
It has its message it tries to hit, in the way it tries to hit it. Is again like that kind of like that cocky, and I think you hit it on the nail on the head. It's like it has edge but isn't edgy. That's all I got. I can talk about confidants and other specific stuff for a long time, but I don't want to get you murdered.
Right. I don't think I have anything else I want to say either. Only thing I'm going to say is next week we are going to be talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender, if you're still good with that.
Yes.
So what we're going to do is I've already done this. We plan on rewatching the first season of the show, and then we're going to watch the movie. I think we should watch it together because it will be a painful experience if we don't. So,
only if we can drag our significant others into it as well.
I think that Psyche said she was interested. I'm not just dragging her into this. I think she actually did say that it's a movie that no one should have to suffer through by themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I've heard nothing good about it. But if you are interested in watching people talk about this, something awful, this is something that we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about the show first. First, specifically the first season, because it's the only season that the movie covers. And then we're going to talk about the movie. We're going to compare and contrast them. And there are, from what I understand, some major differences. Major differences.
Oh, God. It's so awful.
I've heard. Have you seen it?
Yes. I've seen it once before. It's been a minute, but it was enough for me to pretend it didn't exist.
Yeah. It was in a career where M. Night Shyamalan made The Happening. Somehow this topped it.
Yeah.
And he made, like, I don't know what's worse. Which movie was a worse blemish on his career? The Happening, After Earth, or The Last Airbender. He made all three, and they're all three like really, really bad. From what I understand, I haven't seen any of them. I don't like his movies very much. I think that they have an unnecessary twist element. Like, every one of his movies has to have a twist, which defeats the purpose of having a twist ending.
Yeah.
That's beside the point. I think he's a hack, and I'm interested to see how bad this movie is based on what I've heard, compared to what I've heard, because I've heard nothing ever, anything good about it. Yeah. So we'll talk about that next week. Something to look forward to.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, I'm gonna head out. I'm gonna end the stream first. So.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on once again, and I look forward to destroying the Avatar movie next week.
I look forward to the fun time that will be watching it.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
End the stream. It's time.
So, thank you all for showing up and listening to us talk about Persona. Rant.
Say goodbye to your friends.
Rant isn't really the right word because we like the movie and we like the game. We're not only going to talk about things we hate, but we did talk about Persona, and next week we will be talking about something that we are sure to hate. So, With that in mind, thank you so much for showing up. Thank you for our
Bye.
resubscribers, our new follower. And we hope to see you guys soon. Bye.